Welcome to a new episode of Product Directions Podcast, 100 Product Strategies. We are your insider access to top product leaders shaping the strategy of the most diverse industries today. I'm your host, Nacho Basino, and I'll be digging into the real-life situations, problems, and frameworks used for strategy with product people all around the world in all kinds of products and markets. While there is no recipe for success, listening to others' experiences may give you the edge you need to solve your next strategic challenge. Hello, everyone. Today I'm with Jenvey, who is a lead product manager at Sedex, but he has a very interesting background as product manager in very different companies. But most impressive, he is one of those few who jumped directly from school to product management. So I'm really curious to see how that shaped his thinking. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm really glad to have you here. And maybe since I just give only a few words about yourself, can you start by telling us a bit more of what you have been doing lately and who you are?
So I'm Jenvey. I work for Sedex, who do site assessments and audit management to enable socially and environmentally sustainable supply chains for our members. Like you said, I'm one of the few people that went straight from uni into a graduate product position. Like most people back then, I had no idea what product was. I went for a sales job. And during the assessment center, I was asked if I'd be interested in moving on to a product role. And I must say it's one of the best choices I made. So I started up north in Manchester working for Auto Trader on their graduate program. They adopted agile and lean ways of working very early on. So I was really lucky to learn that as it was really becoming famous. Then I ended up moving across to mainly classifieds businesses before moving down to London, where I worked for Moonpig, which today is one of the best product-led companies that I've worked for. Really enjoyed working there. And then moved on into contract roles, been contracting for about 5 years before landing here at Sedex and enjoying it so much that I've now gone permanent.
Excellent. But it's a very interesting point of view to start my first question, which is maybe, and I know that you had some strategy processes kind of in the recent months. So can you tell us a bit about your experience at Sedex creating product strategy? And maybe to give you a bit of more context, my intention is to try to go through the process, the steps, maybe the frameworks or tools you use along the way. So can you walk us through that process?
Yeah. Okay. So I've been at Sedex for just over about a year and a half. When I first joined the company, they didn't have much of a data analyst function. There was one data team, and I was brought in really to look at building out a value prop. So we spent the next 6 months understanding how data is being used by our customers before moving to the decision that we wanted to create a new family, which is the Insights family. And as part of that, developing a strategy to understand how how members can best use our tools, data and insights to really get to the crux of what is in their supply chain that needs attention. So if I'm a supplier that has 30, 40,000 sites from around the world, and I've only got 2 hours today to concentrate on my supply chain management, where are those 2 hours best spent? And that's where the developing a strategy came into place. So we started with the business objective, and the business objective was just that, to direct users to areas of their supply chain that require attention. They understood the customer problem that these buyer members, as we call them, had vast supply chains, global supply chains, and usually the supply chain management or ethical trade coordinators within those business are very overworked, very low on resource, and really, rather than looking at just strings and strings of data, how can we make that easier for them? So what we did is we went and spoke to our customer. So first thing we wanted to do was validate that business objective. We've been provided with that direction. We wanted to understand what our customers felt about it and whether they were doing the same thing. So we very quickly started talking to external and internal customers. mostly through interviews. So we did about 30, 40 interviews. Also ran a much larger survey to try and understand exactly what individual suppliers were doing, and with a special look at the different industries and the different geographical locations that those companies are in. And really trying to focus on what they wanted now. What was the problem that they were trying to solve?
Perfect. Before we continue, because I'm already sensing that it's a very complex product, so I want to ask two questions. The first one is if you can kind of bring with an example a bit of what the product is solving particularly, because I mean you throw, for example, on the ethical trade coordinator or something like that I don't know, and probably many listeners won't either.
No,
the second one,
sorry, go for it.
No, the second one was you mentioned internal and external customers, so maybe having a sense on who is your internal customer as well.
Yeah, by all means. So the problem that we're trying to solve is within our buyer organizations, there's only a handful of people that tend to manage ethical compliance or supply chain management from an ethical point of view. So by that, I mean, looking at my supply chain, understanding where those risks are, and trying to understand where there are potentials for slave labor, forced labor, child labor. So what we do is we use a set of assessment tools to try and understand where there are potential risks in a supply chain. So due to the fact that you do business in a certain country, in a certain industry, we can use a number of data points to understand you're more at risk of child labour, you're more at risk of unhygienic living conditions, not paying your staff, holding passports. So all of those kind of things, we try to use data to understand where the potential risk is. We then follow that up with an auditing program. So that's our main USP. So we have the SMETA audit, which is where we get auditors to go down to the individual sites and understand against our methodology, where are their non-compliances, good observations, and what is that view of that site as a whole.
Very interesting. So basically, it's the providers of your customers are the ones you are inspecting.
Yes, exactly that.
Awesome. Great. Then I needed that clarification. Thank you.
No worries at all.
So I guess when you're talking about internal customers, you are mentioning these people who will actually kind of go to the field, or the operations side that manage this process?
So we have, so when I say internal, external, the external customers really are twofold. They're either our large buyer organizations, so your big conglomerates down to smaller customers, but they're really the end goal. They're where the end user gets a service or a product. So something like a Tesco's, a Morrison's, a Target, a Walmart, those big companies. And then the other side of that is the suppliers that supply them. So they're both members to us. So we need to make sure that what we're creating is an efficient and ethical way to assess those supplier customers and provide the context, information, and insight that our buyer customers want. But I class those both as our external customers. And internally, we have what is the business need. So we need to understand from the exec, what is it that they're trying to drive? Are they trying to drive, more supplier members, more buyer members, a quicker access to insight, more time on platform, less time on platform? So we're trying to understand from a business perspective and what is it that we're trying to achieve for them? Because I think it's sometimes everybody focuses so much on the customer need, and as product managers, that is where we should be focusing. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that customer need is solving a customer problem, but also meeting a business objective. Because if it doesn't meet both, then it's not a successful product. It needs to get that sweet spot in the middle, really.
Yeah, perfect. So now we can. I feel we can get back to your storytelling. So basically, you were telling me that you were out there. So you have the business outcome that you were trying to achieve, and you went out there and validated with customers, and kind of seems to be successful. So what's next?
No, so that was, it went really well. Focused on interviews, surveys, trying to get as much understanding of how the customer is solving the problem now. If there is a problem to be solved, there is a way they'll be solving it. It may be a workaround, it may be an arduous, long journey, but there is a way that problem is being solved now. So it's really key to understand what are they doing without our new product and our new vision, our new ideas, that we can then make easier for them. So that was really trying to understand that frame of reference. We did that a lot with our reference customers. So try to get out of those 30 interviews, get it down to about 5 or 6 customers that we can go back to and develop this product with, customers that really are engaged and really want to involve themselves in that process.
Perfect. So you select these customers and you validated the problem, but that tends to go to, okay, let's execute, but what's in there for the strategy creation? What else or how the strategy comes to life?
Oh yeah, so that's very much the beginning. So once you've validated that business objective, it's then a case of going back to the business and aligning with your organization's vision and objectives. I find that it's so important to be able to go back and be completely transparent with the business, because the business will have an idea of what it is they want to achieve. Your role is then how to achieve that with a customer problem and solving that customer problem. So you have the top down from the business, and then we're using that research to really build up from the bottom up and meet in the middle. And that's where that sweet spot, that product market fit really goes. So with Sedex, they're a relatively new company to product, not a new company in general, but to a product way of working. We're very lucky that actually for a company that's in the middle of a transformation, a digital transformation, it's very on board with the ways of working that are agile and product management and thinking about the customer. But the key bit to a company that's all companies really, but more so with our company, is making sure that all the correct stakeholders have got visibility and able to input every step of the way. I find that if you go forward proactive, make sure that every part of the business that's involved, every stakeholder can have an opinion, can raise a valid thought or idea. If you then validate that and it comes back as wrong, then that's absolutely fine, right? Because I'm coming back with data and I've got a reason that it's wrong. So we started with all of these business objectives and problems to solve. We went back to the business and said, actually, yes, customers do want this and customers do have a problem, but they're actually solving this very differently to how you feel that they should be solving it. The way we did it particularly is we just drew out a lean canvas, tried to understand exactly what it was that the business required and what it was that the customers required. And then we went into a workshop with stakeholders from across the business, and obviously not making it too big, but just making sure that there is adequate representation for every function that would be involved. And then it was a case to be able to present the lean canvas, critique that lean canvas, and as a group, everyone's been heard. Everybody knows that their opinion has been taken into account and either validated or for good reason put out of scope.
Perfect. I have several questions. It's getting very interesting. First one is can you give us an idea of the size of the organization and then the size of this stakeholders table that you put together?
Yeah, so the stakeholder size, I think off the top of my head, we had about 9-10 people in the room. So that was a couple of exec members, including our exec sponsor, who was looking, who oversees and is accountable for the product vision as a whole and that whole area of the business. We then had representatives from different parts of the business. So this is the relationship managers from the business development teams, because if it's not something that our customers can use and it's not something that we can sell to our customers, then it won't be used. So it could be the best product in the world, but if no one knows about it or knows how to use it, it's never going to go anywhere. So they were two of the main areas. Alongside that, because of we have a unique paradigm here, right? So rather than it being B2C and just got to sell from A, get it to B, we have this assessment protocol, and as part of this assessment, this SMETA, we have our responsible sourcing team. So they would be key in understanding actually what we're trying to build. Is it in line with our methodology and the way that we're trying to help people from a social impact point of view. So there's one side of things, which is solving a customer problem, but solving the customer problem in the correct way, which I find has definitely been a new thing for me, because it adds another lens that you may not normally think about when you're working in a strict kind of B2C environment.
Yeah. So, this typical three risks that you mentioned about, being desirable, being valuable, and being feasible. You have all these. So the ethical part, I guess, that for you, this fourth kind of risk is also very, very prominent in that organization.
Exactly, and it's a huge transition. As I said earlier, Sedex was going through a digital transformation, but actually Sedex has historically been a data exchange, which has provided the data for our members' consumption, and they make their own decision off the back of that information. So when you start combining data into insight, you start having a bit of a claim in how that is perceived. And I think it's really important to understand, when you start combining certain data sets to provide certain actions, what you're actually doing is starting to lead customers down a route or a workflow as you normally would. So you'd have a e-com funnel if you were trying to sell something online. But there's that ethical lens that sits on top of that. So are we pushing them down the right way of doing it? Perfect example here is, if we're thinking of an audit process, do we want someone going down to a site to audit them to be efficient and get it done as quickly as possible? Or do we want them to get it done right? Do we want them to spend extra time there, but actually get into the real detail? When you're dealing with something that's kind of far more valuable than, $12.99 buy it now. This is people's lives, the way people work. It's the ethical standpoint is so important.
Very, very interesting. I have so many questions that I feel we will go down that rabbit hole, and so I will hold it back for a second so we can continue the story narrative and then get back to it. But maybe going back to your question. So are we talking about 10 people in this Lean Canvas session, 20 people, 100 people?
So roughly 10 people. I think the important thing is, and what I always try to do is, rather than coming with questions, is to come with proposals. We've done the research. We understand what the business want. We now understand what the customers want. So what we do is we came prepared with a Lean Canvas. This is what our research has provided us. This is the direction that it looks like from a customer perspective, where we want to go, and then providing a proposal as to where we feel we should move on from here, and then let them to critique it, because it's so much easier to see something and critique it and start a conversation than have a blank Lean Canvas and get everybody onto a Miro board and starting to throw post-it notes everywhere. So it allows a bit of a frame.
Would you say this is already part of kind of your strategy? So it's an artifact that has a sort of summary that was saying, hey, we want to go in this direction. Please give us feedback.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's more of an alignment session, I like to see, because you've got the objective, you've now gone to the customers, now you're going back to the business and you're aligning with the business to make sure the direction you're going in is the correct direction for the customer and for the business. So this is really providing a frame of reference and your scope for your entire strategy. Because this is the direction we are going to go. This is the direction that we're not going to go. Because there aren't just ethical concerns and customer concerns. There's also which direction the business wants to go from a strategic point of view. We don't want to build this product because this product is going to be looked at in H2, in Q3. All these different considerations at a much bigger level than just one area of the business.
Perfect. That makes total sense. But I will want to go back one step then and ask you a bit deeper on how you come up with this proposal. So what's the kind of the sort of elements you are trying to get from this customer validation, maybe the trade-offs you need to select among, or how this kind of creating this canvas, how it works?
Yeah, no, by all means. So creating a canvas. So a lot of it does tend to come from those initial conversations. So we had those initial conversations with those customers. We had those initial conversations with the business. We built up those reference customers that wanted to work with us. Then we started going into kind of what ifs. What is it that we want to do with this? Once we'd had alignment in terms of and I know you want to step back, but I actually feel that it's almost the next step. So once we have that alignment on the problems to solve, this is the direction we go. This is where these are the problems that the customers have. Then we tend to go back to discovery, and discovery has a much more focused frame of reference because you understood what is and what isn't in scope. So that initial alignment session for us was really to understand that the direction was the correct direction. Now is when you go back and start actually understanding what is within that strategy. Because a strategy isn't just one product or one insight, especially in data when you're managing, there are hundreds of different insights that you could provide and hundreds of different actions that you could provide. Do we want to give them with information on their surveys that we require each of our members to fill in? Do we want to focus those insights on the audit framework that we use, on the outcome of the audits? Do we want to go down the management route? So there's a huge amount of opportunity there. And I would never be as arrogant as to think that I knew the answers. I find that the product manager's greatest strength is putting the correct people into a room to be able to facilitate the correct problem coming out. So that's when we kind of moved into that next stage. So the next stage, which was almost solutionizing. Well, no, it is solutionizing. Now, when you go into the solution mode, I always hear people talk about, discovery, design sprints, and all of this sort of stuff. Essentially, it's great. All of these frameworks are great. I enjoy design thinking. I enjoy discovery and design sprints. But essentially, they all work around the same process of trying to understand what the problem is, trying to ideate to understand, what are our options, and then test and learn. Right. And I think whether you do that in a 5-day sprint or whether you do that like we did over the course of a couple of months, whether it's diverge and converge or empathize and ideate, it's the same thing. And what we tend to use in Sedex is Miro. Since COVID, obviously everybody's working remotely. It's difficult to try and get everybody into a room. And I must say, when we first started doing these kind of sessions remotely, I was as lost as pretty much every other product manager. But then once we got our hands on Miro and started using that, actually I prefer using it now. It's so much better, and also it saves you having to pick someone at the end. We always had a kind of roulette wheel. It's like, who's going to take all those post-it notes and write them up into notes and send them round. So really, as long as you're doing those steps, right, you've understood, you've gone into a workshop, you've framed your thinking, framed your understanding, done your research. What are our competitors doing? What are other parallels doing? So we looked at insurance providers, credit rating providers online to try and understand how they're doing it. We looked at some accounting software. There was a number of different parallels that we looked at to try and gather as much research as possible before going into these sessions. Now, these sessions, these workshops that we then held to try and understand within that strategy, what are the products that make up the strategy? And essentially we went in there with Miro and tried to get down as many ideas from around the business as possible. So we held sessions again with the BD teams, with the relationship managers, all the different aspects of the business. We went back to our reference customers and did some workshops with them to try and understand, okay, well, how would you solve the problem if you could? Trying to ascertain what the need is from the want, because you obviously always find that members will tell you, or customers, whichever, will always tell you what they want. So I want this, I want that, but actually, what is the need behind that want? What is it you're trying to solve? So we had all of those sessions, gathered all of that research, and then really brought it back into the pod. So the pod being we had some data engineers, some software developers, design, product. We had an analytics. We've got a great analytics manager in the business who also has helped us along the way. And really, from a discovery point of view, started working on how we can start building out those ideas. So we started building out those ideas. Our UX designer went out and started prototyping those. And that's when you started moving into that test and learn approach to try and understand where is it that we're trying to go. And I find that's often the most exciting part, because you go back to customers and in real time almost you're understanding, that's absolutely awful. Well, that's absolutely great. And I find I often have an idea that I just think this is a slam dunk. I don't even need to think about this. This product is going to be exactly what they want. And then you go out and you speak to these customers, you get them to go into these prototypes, and you're just screaming to yourself, you're not clicking in the right place. You're not after the wrong place. Why aren't you doing what I think you're doing? And I think that's a real key bit to it's a good product management. It's to not fall in love with your ideas. Because it's so easy to say, look, I do this day in, day out. I know that you should do X, Y, and Z. But until you go out to customers, there is such a variation in technical maturity. Some people can barely turn on a computer, whereas other people, writing Python scripts in their spare time. You've got to try and really understand as many people as possible. So when we have those reference customers, we try to make sure that we have different personas. So we have everything from learner and discoverer type personas through to your more strategic learner, leader and builder personas. And we try to make sure that we hit at least 3 or 4 of those personas every round of testing to try and come back with what we're trying to do.
That's great. So you told me a lot about the journey now, and I'm putting the pieces together. So I have two questions regarding the canvas. I promise I will not keep bothering with that, but just to clarify my thinking around it. So the first question is, so maybe why the canvas itself? So what's the purpose of presenting the information in that way? And the second, maybe more relevant and important, is, can you give us an example of what's in the canvas? Is kind of an insight you collect? It's like the kind of competitors are doing this or that, or it's more about a decision like, hey, we want to focus on this particular problem?
Okay, so what we're saying is, what is in that canvas? How do we structure that canvas? By all means. So there's a number of ways of doing this, and I find the reason we use the lean canvas or any of the other ways is to frame our thinking and to provide a holistic view of all the different bits of the puzzle in one really too easy to understand document. I find if you're building something which is more a feature or a individual product, there are other ways of doing it. So I know Marty Kagan has mentioned in his book a lot about letter from the CEO or a fake press release that will say what this new product would do. I find that really works well with those individual bits that make up a strategy. But when you're building something which is more all-encompassing. So this was a strategy for an entirely new family of pods and a new direction completely for what we were doing. For that, we tried to build the canvas to really articulate all of that bigger grandeur in one. So the lean canvas, you have your validated problems. So 3 or 4 problems that really say what it is that you're trying to solve with this stream of work. We then have the potential solutions, and those solutions wouldn't be something like, I want to have a page that when I click on, it provides me with XYZ. I click here to send an email. It's more encompassing than that. So what we're trying to do is say, what are the solutions? What does the customer need to achieve in order for this to be correct? And then we move to what is our unique value proposition. So what is it that we're doing that other people can't or other people would find difficult, which then leads into unfair advantage. What is it that breaks us away from other people? So for us, it's the amount of data we have. It's the amount of global reach we have. We're one of the biggest socially compliant supply chain management platforms in the world. So we have a huge amount of data, both from our individual audits and SMETA methodology through to who our customer base is and how they operate. And then we try to get that all down, understand who our customer segments are, what are those key metrics. And I think that's a really key one to get down and really have aligned with the business. So the business may say they want to have an increase in CSAT scores. They want to have an increase in supplier numbers. All of these sort of things make up that business objective. So it's really keen to understand, as well as what you're solving for the problem, for the customer, what is it that you're trying to achieve for the business? We then start looking at stuff like revenue streams, cost structure, how we're going to deliver this, so what channels, and what the high level concept is. So if you think about all of those pieces of the puzzle, to have that in one document that can be easily critiqued, easily queried, you facilitate a very good conversation with those 10, 12 people in a room.
That makes perfect sense. Now I'm just really grasping the process. I love it. I have one more question about. So let me go back one step. What I'm trying to get to is how you actually make the decisions that fill this canvas. So I will put it with an example. You go to the ground. You are having this business outcome that you want to achieve. You are validating the problem with the customers, and you probably will find that. I know you mentioned a customer is solving this in a way that is not optimal, and we find customer A is doing that, customer B is doing that, customer C is doing another thing. So we try to make a proposal, a decision, kind of, okay, we believe that this is kind of mentioned, kind of the high level way we want to solve this problem, given our strengths or something like that. So.
Okay, so then how do we then break that down and work on of all these different directions?
Exactly. I'm just saying, as a pod, do you have, a mirror board with these insights? Do you have a session in which you will debate, okay, is this approach better than others, or this kind of thing?
Yeah, so we have a Miro working board which kind of encompasses all of our discovery thinking. So everything that we've spoken to, so notes from interviews, conversations that we've had with the business. We have decision logs to remember, actually, this was the direction that we decided. This is the reason why we decided that direction. And then what we do is we break it down into all of those hypotheses that we want to test. Okay. We look at all of those ideas that we've quickly gone out and prototyped. And then what we tend to do is, I've used this a few times, which is impact versus effort mapping. So then we just get a big matrix of, on one scale, you have low to high effort, and on the other scale is a low to high impact. And I find that it almost builds your roadmap for you, at least your beginnings of a roadmap, because it says, actually, I could build this really easily, but it's actually very low value. I could build this, it'd be very difficult, but it's really high value. So what you do is you start taking that to understand where the value really lies, and then for each of those ideas, have one hypothesis. So you can say, I want to build X and provide this solution. We'll know it will be true when Y. So then we start building out these experiments that goes back to our users, try to test these hypotheses out. And then over time, what you do is you get a list of validated hypotheses by impact, by effort, and then that really starts forming into your development sprint.
Perfect. And one more thing is, how do you organize this mirror board? Because I guess that you mentioned all our discovery work, which may go into very different directions. So is there kind of a tree structure, or I don't know, domain structure? How do you organize it?
No, good question. So we tend to just use frames. So we have frames for all of our initial research. So that would be the understanding. So that will all be split by an understanding frame. Within that, we'll have a lot of research. Then we'd move into an ideation phase, and that again would have another frame. And within that, we'd have subframes. So it's quite a rigorous structure. But actually, when you then go back to it, you have this giant Miro board that's zoomed out to 2%, and you can quite easily just go in and select the frame that you're trying to work with. So if you're trying to understand a little bit of reference material from an interview done way back when versus what is the list of hypotheses that we're trying to test, you can quite easily snap to that frame of reference. So you have a frame for understanding, a frame for ideation, and then a frame for essentially working with the business. So all of that information, which could be derived as noise to some of the kind of exec members. So if you think of an exec member or a business sponsor or even heads of, they're dealing with so many different things from around the business that almost you need to get rid of a layer of detail and actually just provide those key bits of insight. So then we have a separate frame which just provides those key bits of insight that allows us to then go back, fix to that frame, and then speak with the business.
Perfect. And maybe one more thing about that is kind of these three frames that you mentioned. What is the fly level in which you put a topic? Is like kind of a feature level, or is more like a domain area, like this kind of compliance management, or kind of onboarding new users, or are these kind of big broader topics, or is more down to specific things? So you have like maybe kind of 3 or 4, or you have hundreds of them?
So, well, what I just described there would be for kind of one area of the business. So we have essentially 4 different work streams that sit within actionable, within the Insight family, dealing with 4 very different problems that we're trying to solve. Each of them would have one of these boards. And then we have almost an aggregated version that we have when we meet as a family.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's kind of resembling the structure of the teams, the problems you want to solve. Perfect.
Exactly. And as long as they're talking to each other, I think that's the main bit. So we're not building in silo. There needs to be that each of these swim lanes or areas of work, pods, whatever you want to call them, they all need to be working towards that one focus. So it's really important to have empowered teams that understand where they're trying to get to and what their slice of the strategy leads into.
Yeah, perfect. And maybe now that you mentioned that, I think it's a good jump to my next question, which is you mentioned at some point these metrics, these success criteria, or even the hypothesis that has some success implicit on it. So for your strategy that you mentioned, kind of the lean canvas decision, do you have already at that level the objectives you want to kind of trying, or the assumptions of the objectives you are trying to hit? And what's the time frame you're using for that?
Okay, time frames is it's an interesting one. That's always a tricky subject. So what I tend to do when I'm delivering a strategy, so I have a PowerPoint that has, for each of the pods and areas of focus, it has a understanding of what is it we're trying to do, what's our pod vision that meets the business's bigger product vision, and then I structure it in a now to later. I don't even use now next when now next later. Sorry, I just have now later big old arrow. Okay, and the reason why I do that, right, is because in all my years working in product, you only really achieve, if you're lucky, 50% of a roadmap. If not, it's down to 20% of a roadmap. Before you end up rebuilding it and going in a different direction. The beautiful thing about Agile is it moves as customers do, as business does. And I think that's, that's one of its key strengths. So what we do is we have, for each of the areas and the product managers within that will derive what is it I want to achieve now and where would it lead. So it's about selling that vision almost. So right now we're going to build these factors. But then they will build out into this. And then essentially the bit at the beginning is the stuff that you're working on. Each of the streams of work will have a Q1, Q2 deliverable for this year, for example. You should, we're in end of February now. So Q1 is well and truly underway. Q2 is not cement, but it's getting there. It's nice and close. After that, it's just, we know the direction we want to go in. I think that's really important, is just understand the direction. Whether we actually build that in Q3 or Q4 is almost irrelevant, because it all depends on what feedback we get from customers in Q1 and Q2 this year. So for each of the areas, we have their now to later, where they see it going and what they're looking at now. They all have goals and objectives that they want to hit, alongside KPIs for Q1, Q2. And then the second half of the year really will build out as we kind of move into Q2. Okay,
perfect. So reading between the lines, even though you're having very abstract and you are kind of explicitly declaring uncertainty, you are still aiming for a 12-month sort of thingy.
I have some strong views about where I'd like us to go in the kind of 3 to 5 year mark as a family level. But essentially none of that, all of that is just ideation. And so it should be. We know as a family, we got together and we built a North Star, not the North Star framework, but a North Star vision of where we want to be in 3 to 5 years' time. We produced a design of the potential products that there could be and what we want our customers to see. But it was more of a, if there was no holds barred, no resource, where do we want to get to? What is the purpose of what we're doing now? But then once we have that vision, that vision stays there. We work on it every 6 months. We might go back and have a look at that vision to make sure it's still in keeping with where we want to go to. But that's really where that exercise finishes. And then the focus really becomes like, what can I achieve? What am I looking to achieve now to help us build towards that goal? Which is why you always need to have that North Star that you're aiming for. But I wouldn't expect any of the product managers, BAs within the Insight Pod to be working this time next year in the exact same roadmap that they had, where they were presenting in January of this year.
Perfect. One question to that. We mentioned at the very beginning, this business outcome that you are trying to achieve, this kind of the founding principle of your strategy. Is this somehow captured in a metric that is kind of, or a KPI that is, in 1 year, we need to deliver this for the business?
Yes. Yeah, it is. So we know what we want to achieve. We have a statement for 6 months, a statement for 12 months. So for the H1, we want to be able to pinpoint. So if a member only has 2 hours to do their ethical supply chain management today, we are to pinpoint them to the area of their supply chain that requires the most attention.
Okay, perfect. I'm trying to think how to measure that, but sounds like measurable at some point.
So there are a large amounts of KPIs and metrics that sit under that. Luckily, working in data, everything is trackable, which is probably one of the easier parts of working in data. We know how users are managing their supply chain. So they're looking, when they do an audit, there are severities of non-compliances, how overdue are non-compliances. We have transparency scores that we're looking at building to look at the difference between what a member might say versus what the reality is. So all of these are trackable and are tracked as KPIs, but our statement, our vision of where we want to be in 6 months, in 12 months, in 3 years, in 5 years are more just that. It's those statements to understand where we're trying to get to.
Got it. It's very clever, and somehow it seems a very, very important problem to solve, very complex and important problem to solve. So interesting. And in terms of making this more operational, so what type of quarterly goals or even quarterly ceremonies between the pods and with the business, there is a sort of strategy review or sorts?
Yeah, so we work agile 2-week sprints, all of that standard jazz, which is that's your operational in pods behavior. Then we have, for each of the discovery areas that we're focusing on, we have a 2-week showcase that goes back to the business, back to those original stakeholders that we spoke about at the beginning, those 10 people in a room, where we go back and say, okay, well, this is what we've achieved in the last 2 weeks. This is the direction we're looking at. Voice any important pivots or any changes in direction. I find that Sedex is really great at empowering its product leaders and product managers to really push and work on behalf of the members. But I find that if you don't go back and communicate, that's when people decide they want more meetings. And at the bad end of it, and I've seen it happen previously, is when product managers go dark, and it ends up becoming almost a case of 2-3 sessions every week to try and understand exactly what's going on. The way that we operate is really, you go to the business, to the discovery pod with representatives from each team. You say exactly what it is we're trying to do and the reasons for any changes or decisions that have been made, and allow people to voice their opinion. Because even if there's assumption, there's value in assumption, right? An assumption can be validated. So I think it's really key that everybody is understood, everyone is heard and knows what they're doing.
That's awesome. And I assume that gives a lot of context of what's happening, how the strategy is evolving. On top of that, is there any, let's say, more higher level checkpoint? Okay, like for example, this statement is, hey, this is the statement for 6 months. Is there a review of, okay, did we achieve that? Or do we need to move, review the link canvas, anything like that's going on?
No, that's interesting, because I did this only last week.
Nice.
So we have a roadmap, and like I said, we have it's a lot more strict and cement now than it is later. Mm-hmm. But for the next 6 months, we have key decision points, and that's what we use at Sedex. So, for example, I will have one product that once we release this product, and we're calling it actionable insight, there will be a decision that needs to be made. That is, once we release it, based on the feedback we have from our customers, do we stick with this actionable insight and then progress it, or do we pivot and move into a different direction? It's to say, so every time we have, it's not just a product release, it's more when we do, like we go out of MVP and it's that first production release. Mm-hmm. We need to know that we're not building anything off the back of that until we fully validated the product that we've built. It's so easy when you go into MVP, you then magpie onto something more shiny over here or something more shiny over there. So what we try to do is make sure that our next stages of our roadmap are based on those decision points. Those decision points go all the way up to the CEO. We present to the CEO and the exec sponsor, and every time we hit one of them, or we're about to hit one of those, we go back and realign. So that happens, as you can imagine, as and when. So 3-4 times. Whereas go with the lean canvas, that happens every 2 weeks. We have that lean canvas up there. If we need to go back and look at it, we will. So if we've decided we're pivoting a direction and this is the reason why, then we'll go back and say whether we need to adjust that lean canvas. No documents in Agile should be kind of sand, a bit of a line in the sand. So we try to adapt it as and when we become more educated in what we're trying to create.
Love it. So it's so using my terminology, kind of the review is continuous and it's kind of fit within this 2 weeks loop, which is awesome, by the way. And then what we will normally call more kind of a higher level strategy review is based on the milestones that your strategy has implemented, which is kind of awesome because you get rid of these, artificial cadences that say, hey, we need to review every 3 months because the clock is saying that we need to review.
Well, then it's just theatre then, isn't it? If you're just doing it for the sake of it. The way I see it in short is those meetings that we have every 2 weeks, that's kind of like dual track agile, right? So we've got that development phase, we're also discovering at the same time, and those are used to understand where those decisions and pivots are happening. And then the bigger picture is really from a more strategic lens on it, where, are we going in the right direction? Is the exec happy? Is the board happy? Is the CEO happy?
Oh, love it. I have one final question, I promise, and this is my last one, but I was thinking all along the way, what happens? I mean, you are very deep in discovery and in kind of getting feedback from your customers. What happens when you uncover a business problem different from the one that you have being the inception of this strategy? So either, I won't say conflict because it doesn't need to conflict, but I will assume that naturally through these conversations, you will uncover something that your customers need that will maybe an even stronger business outcome that the company can leverage. So how will that play out?
So it has happened a couple of times. I find that, again, it's about communication and transparency. Seldom do massive pivots come out of nowhere. There's usually a reason why it's happened. There's those signs that build up. So I find that if you've communicated and you've brought business along with a journey, the different stakeholders, your sponsor, then when something like that happens, it's a case of reassessing. Do we go back and look at the lean canvas, for example, and say, are we addressing the correct problem? Do we want to add this problem on top? Is there a way that we can amalgamate this with our existing research? But very much like we talk about with, documents not going stale and being living documents. The whole process of discovery and agile should be a living process. If you find a new way of doing something, then that should be explored, hypotheses drawn up, validate those hypotheses, go back to the customer, go back to the business, and make that decision as a whole. I find that, if it's my opinion versus your opinion and you're an exec member, then your opinion wins. But but then when you have data and you've gone back, you've done that research, and you come armed with, these are the reasons why we want to change this, change direction. This is why we should be addressing this product. This is why we should be addressing this problem. And here's all the data to back it up. Then that's it's difficult to argue. Not that one would want to argue, but it's always good to have data-led decisions rather than emotionally-led ones.
Absolutely. And there is all this sometimes misinterpretation of the empowered teams. At the end of the day, I have not seen yet any stakeholder that presented with good evidence will not support a team decision that is going in the direction that the business will benefit. So every team is empowered as long as they can present and produce the evidence that supports what their claims for the decisions. So
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. And by the way, that being said, it seems like you are building the right context to make that conversations easier or flow more naturally. So I love the setup you described. I'm done. I will ask my closing question, which is going back to you basically and saying what I didn't ask. So what's some learning about strategy you have along the way that may be interesting to say that I didn't cover with my questions?
Okay. So I would say it's about selling your strategy. So for me, I found when I was working as a graduate in Auto Trader, 13, 14 years back, when I wanted to propose a product, I would fill my slides with data from GA, Comcast data, conversations that I've had with suppliers, surveys with each data point right on there, percentages, derived logic, how we were going to achieve X, Y, and Z in intricate detail. And I almost found that I was at a loss. What you ended up with was you present it to people that are across multiple departments, multiple pods, that don't have the time to be able to digest that information. Mm-hmm. So either you put too much detail in it and people get lost, or you put too little detail into it and people don't believe it. So I found for me, moving through products, the best thing I learned was how to adapt what you're saying and how you're communicating the same thing, but how you communicate it to different people. And the example I'd give is, if we are in a pod and it's myself, designers, developers, we'll go into that detail of how we want to achieve X, Y, and Z. But if I'm speaking to the commercial director about a product, they don't want to know that we need a feed from the database through to an internal API that will then run X, Y, and Z. What they want to know is, what am I trying to achieve? So for that, it's a lot more commercially minded. It's a lot more customer journey minded. So for that, I'd almost work with my UXer to say, how can I visualize this journey to that stakeholder? Whereas you wouldn't almost need that if I was talking to a data engineer.
Yeah, love it. And I'm laughing because I was actually asked this question last week. Someone asked, what is the most important soft skills for product managers? And I was going for typical communication. But what I mean with communication is being able to change the language according to your audience. So perfect fits, and I couldn't agree more. And for strategy, it's so damn important for strategy as well. All right. Joe, this has been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it. You share a lot of knowledge. Thanks for supporting enduring all my questions. I know I can be a bit painful. What else do you want to tell to the audience where they can find you, or anything exciting going that you want to share?
No, I'm on Joseph Jenvey. I'm on LinkedIn. If you ever want to speak about product, I'm a frequent product tank as well. I'm down in London, so yeah, I'm a big fan of all things products. So always happy to have a conversation, or even an argument about product.
Thanks so much, Joe. I really enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Have a good day. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of 100 Product Strategies, the podcast by Product Direction. You can also follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or Instagram to get access to free weekly content that helps product people upgrade their skills and become more successful. You can access more material, promotional trainings, and be notified of every episode of the show with Product Direction's weekly newsletter. Join thousands of product leaders by registering in productdirection.co.